Let's get started. My name's Upmanu Lal. I'm at Arizona State University, and I would like to welcome you guys to our first talk in the series on water in the West. We'll be running this through the year, except during the summer when everyone has a right to escape. And I'm very pleased to have Sam Fernald from New Mexico State here today. He's physically at ASU, which is a unique thing for the series because the design of the series is to be online. We have, as you probably know, 7 speakers, 6 talks coming up, including today's. And, and then starting in the fall, we'll have a new retinue. So if you are interested in giving a talk, definitely reach out to me and we'll be excited to do this. Also in the fall, we'll organize a workshop on the future of the Colorado River, taking off from the last talk in the current series, and I think we expect mostly academics to come to it. We want this workshop to be a free thinking workshop about ideas on how we could do things in a changing climate, changing social values, and changing demographics, unfettered by the past. So hopefully that'll be interesting as an exercise, maybe not in futility, but just as an exercise. So that will be in person. We haven't settled the dates yet. So if you're interested in that, please write to Corey and let her know. And so we are very pleased to have Sam with us physically today. And Sam is the director of the New Mexico State Water Resources Research Center. And as I said in today's message, which not everybody has probably seen, he's also leading a significant project which is bringing a Western water network together to look at water and agriculture. So I thought no better time than to drag him out here and have him talk to you. So all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Manu. It's a real honor to be here as part of your course. And I'm just going to proceed. I think perfect. Can those online see the slides okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll start with our one of our community projects in New Mexico, and step back a little for some community, participation from the members of our group in present and online. And then we'll talk about some of the tools we have, water budgets, for making sense of some of these challenges, and come back to this project that Manu just mentioned that we're working on to try to have some audacious solutions connecting water communities of the West. So launching right into tradition, I guess I'll address the group and then the people online will be fine. But basically we have in New Mexico, if you go to Reclamation in Denver and look at their big 3D map of projects around the West, they have all these reservoirs and irrigated landscapes, but they don't include northern New Mexico. And if you look at a Landsat image that's on the right, there's all these green corridors of irrigated land, and it's irrigated by these traditional acequias. And this shows one, it's called Acequia Pararega Dio. That means irrigation ditch. And it's, in this case, diverting water from Santa Fe River, and it then returns by gravity back toward the river and irrigates landscapes on the floodplain. And in this case, it's for Santa Fe, but they're all over the New World, brought since the 1500s. And these are ditches that are many times hand dug, sometimes pretty small. You see some examples of acequia irrigated fields at one of our experiment stations. New Mexico State University has the Alcalde experiment station where we've done a lot of study of these. But they're not only ditches, they're also community organizations. So in this case, there's an annual meeting of these kind of loosely knit acequia groups. There's no centralized infrastructure like an irrigation district. They're more or less on their own, and they use these traditional structures they've had for many hundreds of years to manage the water. And one of those that's particularly interesting is the sharing of water in wet and dry years. And this is an example, if you go to most Western states, priority law is in effect where the priority in time shall give the better rate, meaning senior water rates, older water rates get precedence, particularly in dry times. They might actually get their water and junior water rates won't if it's not, if there's not sufficient water for all water rates. Well, under acequia water management regimes, this is just a physical representation you see in this picture of the water management structure, which is to share high flow and low flow equally. It's called a repartidor, and you see that at this high flow, the water is divided evenly, and the same thing happens at the low flow, which is particularly well suited for drought. And this actually allows acequias to maintain an agricultural footprint. It's a study that Bob Sabey did and shows that in a dry year, there's a contracted footprint. There's many irrigators out on the landscape and using that reduced water to irrigate a smaller amount of land. In a wetter year, they expand out to irrigate a larger footprint of irrigated land. That's on the lower image on the right. So this is a very adaptable system. And there are some challenges because it's mostly earth and ditches. So there are many people that are concerned. I just got a call last week. There's a small acequia in northern New Mexico. Some of the members don't want to spend time every spring cleaning out the ditch. So they want to put it in a big pipe. And we actually set out a number of years ago to try and understand what's the value of the seepage from these earthen ditches. And we used a water budget approach. So that means you go out and you measure all the water fluxes and storage, inflow, outflow. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all the instrumentation, but I have a bunch of slides with me if anybody's curious. And it's an involved operation, but really fun. You get to go out and measure all the different aspects of the hydrologic cycle. And this is just an example of the one we studied where you can see the acequias actually put that water out on the landscape, and then it makes this corridor of green irrigated land. So I just picked out a few interesting results from some of our studies, and a very important one is that you get water that's spread out over fields that actually soaks below the rooting zone of the plants. That's called deep percolation because the plants can't grab it anymore, and it goes down to groundwater. And you can see in this figure, actually, I would go over there, but since I'm online, actually, I'm just gonna point this out. But you can see there are these spots where the water from above actually goes to the groundwater. That's that line along the bottom during an irrigation season. And the groundwater comes up in a little spike when the water from irrigation percolates below the plant roots and goes down and reaches the groundwater and causes it to rise. And we modeled and measured that and got some really good quantification of these processes. And just on average, what happens, this shows 3 years in that valley I just showed the picture of. And it's so interesting because every year that irrigation water, and by the way, we looked at mountain front recharge and it's minimal. So this is mostly that irrigation water, the groundwater comes up in the spring and then it slowly goes down. And even after the irrigation system's turned off, it continues to recede as water flows out underground to the river to go downstream. And that happens every year, it goes up and it comes down. And it's a very important process, that connection between surface water and groundwater. Yes, sir.
So what's the time frame in this location between I irrigate here and sort of extra stream flow shows up?
Okay.
Is it days, months?
The question is, what's the time frame between when they irrigate and when the extra stream flow shows up? And we have a pretty good answer for that. I didn't include the slide, but if you look at there's about up to, well, the irrigation season goes until about October. But the continued reduction of that groundwater goes on for another 2 to 3 months. So that's the time frame. It's like for 3 months, that water is still soaking out and going back into the river. It's so important because people need the water downstream after spring runoff. So it basically stores that water and retransmits the hydrograph to later in the year. That's a critical question. Thank you. Any other questions from online while we're in a quick Q&A? Well, we put together a water budget, found that 33% of the water that's diverted into the irrigation system either goes to ditch seepage, 12%, or deep percolation, 21%. Most of the rest goes back to the river, and 7% in this case goes to consumptive losses, evapotranspiration to the atmosphere. We've done similar studies in other sites, and up to 60% of that water is evapotranspiration, but there's always a significant component of groundwater recharge in these systems. So stepping back a little, if you look around northern New Mexico, southern Colorado, this pattern of yearly rise and fall of groundwater because of irrigation is found in aquifers in San Luis Basin, Española Basin, even Middle Rio Grande. But as you continue downstream along the Rio Grande, I guess you guys can't see my, we're starting to continuing down to the Mesilla aquifer and then the Hueco Bolson. When you get to Texas, back in the 50s, there is severe drought, and this lower graph here shows increased pumping in excess of recharge. And actually, their aquifer started dropping and went down 150 feet and became completely disconnected from their river. And more recently, if you go to the Mesilla Basin, we're starting to see that signal since about 2002, when there was a lot less surface flow and increased groundwater pumping. So there's a big problem of aquifers potentially moving into this situation of increased pumping, less recharge, and depletion. So that sort of concludes the community perspective. So we're looking at water budgets. And now we're going to, just a couple other points here, that what happens when you drop the groundwater? Well, here's an example from Tucson. The Santa Cruz used to be a perennial river. And basically not just in Tucson, but the groundwater extraction along the entire river ended up causing the Santa Cruz to be an ephemeral river now that just flows in response to storm events mostly. And this has happened all over Arizona, 80 and 90% reduction in perennial stream miles largely because of groundwater pumping that sort of pulls the rug out from under the surface water system. And last point here, before we go to survey perspectives, if you look at the Western US here in this map of the United States, this is one of the early versions from Famiglietta showing GRACE satellite data. And what it is there's these two satellites going around in orbit, and they measure changes in gravity. And you can actually normalize all the other data and show that the change in mass of the Earth is because of water that has actually been extracted and sent to the atmosphere. So you can see California lost a huge amount of mass, and over here in the Ogallala Aquifer, there's a large amount of groundwater depletion that you can see from space. And recent studies have actually made it easier to downscale these data and show that basically you can look at groundwater depletion with this satellite approach. So before I get into other data, I want to hear what people think about that. So we are going to ask everybody to participate, including those in back. You can't get off this easy. So this is actually from a survey from the public in Arizona and New Mexico. So the first question, what state do you live in? What state do you all live in? Arizona. Okay. What about online?
I'm from Michigan.
Michigan. Well, maybe we can put your answers in the chat for the next one. So this survey was from mostly people from Arizona, but also some people from New Mexico. And by the way, this is Maggie Walroth, the grad student who put these data together. This is hot off the presses. We haven't really analyzed the data, but she put them together for me to show at this presentation. Thank you. So knowledge, and this is where maybe we can look at the chat. Oh, I'm actually in full screen. That's not going to work. But if people could shout out online, we'll start with the people in person and then go online. So what is an example of one of the top water users in Arizona? Which? Farmwork? Yeah. What about, do you have an example? Industry. Industry?
Agriculture is probably the largest single user.
Okay, we have agriculture. What do you think is the largest user of water? Which ones? Industry and agriculture. Okay, what do we have from online?
Well, Sam, the state engineer claims that ag uses 77% of the water in New Mexico, so I can't disagree with that.
Okay, this is interesting. Any other top water user ideas?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat what the audience said here. They said agriculture and industry.
Industry is the smallest user in urban areas.
But then we've had a comment that industry is the smallest user. Well, I'm going to show the results here, which I think are interesting. Top, according to surveyed population, was public water supply, water user. After that, agricultural irrigation, then livestock, power, mining, aquaculture, and then wells and industry. So if you look, as Frank just mentioned, 79% actually in 2020 water use by categories report is agricultural water use in New Mexico, 21% other uses, non-agricultural. If you look at Arizona, 72% agricultural use, 6% industrial, and 22% municipal. So there's a very interesting difference between opinion about where the water is being used and where it's actually being used. Some people might say, well, what about the fact that most of the survey respondents came from Maricopa County? And it turns out that even Maricopa County is 60%, 62% irrigation water use. So this is an important area for understanding and informing people about how water is used. So here's an interesting one. How has your use of irrigation water per acre changed in the past 5 years? So what do you think? Did it go up or go down or stay the same? What?
Small decrease.
Small decrease. Small decrease. Okay, online, what do you think the 300 respondents who are irrigating responded?
They probably said decrease, but it's definitely increased.
Very interesting. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would also say that it's increased given the just conditions, weather conditions, heat, all that.
Yeah. So a widespread perspective is that because of drought, irrigation has gone down, but in fact, the biggest answer has stayed the same. Second answer is increased. And then far behind was decreased. And just to elaborate on what one of the online people said, this is a study done by Albano et al. That is one of the collaborators on a project we have with UC Merced. Apoxiglu is on this paper and made us aware of it. But if you look at evaporative demand over the last 40 years, it's gone up by 15% in the Rio Grande alone and around the West. And that means that to have a fully watered crop, you need more water because of climate change and increase in temperatures. Regardless of precipitation, you're going to need more water. And that's expected to continue in the next 40 years. So yeah, I think we're actually seeing that play out in irrigators' responses to this survey, that they are irrigating more. Recreation, how concerned are you about the health of surface water in your state? Well, we'll start with Arizona. How concerned are you about, and in this case, it's for recreation, boating, fishing, swimming. Are you concerned about the future health of your surface water? About water quality, that would affecting those uses? Okay. What do you think? Not very concerned. Are you concerned?
I work more on water recreation in California. And I think it's maybe slowly improving because of restoration activities.
Okay, so what do we hear online about? Are you concerned?
Yeah, I'm outdoors a lot. I'm very concerned.
Let's see what the survey respondents said. Unconcerned was a small amount, neutral, and some were a little more, most were a little concerned, and then a lot were very concerned. So people are quite concerned about the health of surface waters. And interestingly, in Arizona, there's been, and New Mexico, there has been a decline in perennial waters in the last 100 years.
I wonder if the surface water for recreation includes swimming pools in your house or not. But that also would change.
Right. There may be some elaboration needed on some of these. All right, well, I think we have a couple more. This one is about sustainability, which is an important component of sustainability. And the top vote getter was long-term water availability, which is nice because that kind of matches up with the definition. The second highest was implementing water conservation practices. And it's interesting because this graph from Arizona DWR shows that water use since the 1950s has been relatively flat. It went up and came down a little, but that's all the while that population and gross domestic income have been increasing. So there's kind of a decoupling of water consumption and, in this case, mostly urban population growth.
Is that
So yes.
is that just municipal water use or like public water use, or is that also industrial and commercial?
I think this particular one is the probably M&I. I would have to actually check that. I got this off the AWR site. How concerned are you about water shortages in the next 5 years? Are you concerned? Yes. Are you concerned?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
So everybody here is concerned. Are you even the professor. Are you concerned? Everybody's concerned. How are we online? Are people concerned about water shortages?
Yes.
Yes. So in this case, we had the highest response was a little concerned, and about even on neutral and very concerned. So it's interesting how the understanding of water use and the perceptions of the future play out, and we'll keep working on that. But it's clear that I think there's a lot of room for education. Yes.
I wonder if that's different between New Mexico and Arizona. Because of the sharks, on the Colorado River.
Yeah.
Which appeared a couple of years ago, but which wouldn't affect New Mexico in the same way, although obviously there are issues with Rio Grande. But I think there was a sense in Arizona that we were no longer invulnerable.
Any comments from the online group before we move to the next section?
Living in New Mexico, did you experience any shock? I do think there was a kind of shock here when it looked as though we would sort of possibly run dry. Did that spill over? I mean, there's no reason why it should spill over in the same way. So I was guessing that it really didn't appear as a shock in New Mexico.
That's my perception, that a lot of the surface water consumption is moved to groundwater, so we're a bit insulated from those surface water related sort of changes to the system. In the water community, it's a big concern, obviously, but that's my perception. Good question. I'm jotting down some of these questions. All right, well, we're doing great. We're gonna move to a little bit of the third part, which is what are we using to kind of address some of these perceptions. And the main point of this talk is to talk about water budgets. So if, again, agricultural water use being the largest consumer of water in New Mexico, it's important to come up with some audacious solutions for managing this water. And it requires an understanding of the water resources. And we're using some water budget tools to do that, and we'll be proposing some new ones for this new project. So the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute developed the dynamic statewide water budget with some great partners, the universities in New Mexico and agencies. And just kind of going quickly through what's written in the text here is the idea is to have a model that covers all spatial scales and addresses water scarcity and use. So we set up this model. The blue arrows are, in essence, inputs. The orange arrows are outputs, orange and red, and then there's storage in the rectangles. So over multiple spatial scales and modeling periods, historic and future, there's that team I mentioned, has put together 30 million data points in one model to kind of easily just characterize what the water fluxes and storage are. And I'm just gonna point out a few of the things that may be pretty obvious, but it's a data-centered characterization of some of these conditions. First of all, if you go to the Ogallala Aquifer, we already saw from that GRACE data that it's being depleted, and that's the blue line here that shows over time a depletion in groundwater storage. And that's the aquifer over on the right with the little blue outline of Lee County. Whereas if you look at Socorro County, which is in the area of the Rio Grande where there's aquifer recharged by surface water, we saw some slight increase into the 90s, and then around 2000 with drought, we've seen a slight decrease. But the recharge from the aquifer from the river is critical. This same pattern is shown in the spatial visualization, where the dark colors are the reduced groundwater storage, where the Ogallala Aquifer is the main source of water. Does that make sense, by the way? Is that pretty clear? Great. This is a very important thing for those of you who might not think about water every day, all day, but climate is causing shifts in runoff. So, for example, in Lower Rio Grande, 80% of the water comes from the northern watershed, where it's mostly snowmelt runoff. But with increasing temperature and the earlier runoff and less runoff, we're getting an already noticeable shift in the hydrograph to later in the year. And if you look out to 2100, we might be looking at something where a snowmelt runoff period is really either truncated or reduced. And the hope is there's going to be more monsoon runoff. I've talked to municipal utility managers, farmers, and even though my friend pointed out that hope is not a good plan, they actually are hoping for a good monsoon season, because the snowmelt runoff is, this year in particular, is lower than average snowpack. So what this graph shows is the orange line is historical. We get most May, June runoff from the mountain snowpack. And that may shift where there's earlier and less runoff and then more monsoon season runoff. And we're already seeing that to some extent. What that means is with less surface water, there's actually an increase in groundwater consumption. So this shows, this is not a scenario, this is historical, but the surface water is blue and the groundwater is orange, and the surface water has gone down since the 70s, and the groundwater use has gone up. So that actually creates a resource planning issue, because a lot of the systems are set up for diverting surface water off the river, and they're not set up for this long-term groundwater consumption. Even though it's been working, it creates an imbalance that could have long-term.
The two graphs, extraction and surface and
They are, so that it's actually diversion. So I didn't put the depletion graph here, which is, it's pretty interesting actually, because depletions, just like with municipal, are actually pretty flat, but meaning consumptive loss to the atmosphere. But this is withdrawal, diversion into the system from either the surface water or from groundwater pumping.
Do the cities have access to groundwater? What I'm getting at is, are there different people pumping surface water versus pumping groundwater? Different entities?
Yes. The cities pump surface or use surface water when they can, but they realize that it's not reliable. So it's more like an addition. And even Las Cruces, where New Mexico State is, has had it set up to do a treatment plant for surface water, but the reduced surface water availability, they actually, I think, totally scrapped that plan. Did that answer your question? Alrighty, so I was part of a paper that Scarcity and Excess that was talking about tackling water-related risks to agriculture in the United States, put out by Environmental Defense Fund a couple years ago. And there were some interesting conclusions. Agricultural productivity is adversely impacted by the dual water stressors of scarcity and excess, with climate-driven extreme events such as droughts and floods, further threatening food security, nutrition, and livelihoods. And a shout out to California, because it's such an important agricultural part of the West. the 2012 to 2016 drought led to about 540,000 acres of fallowed farmland in 2015, costing the state's economy $2.7 billion in gross revenue and 21,000 jobs. So these water impacts on agriculture are huge. There's a graph in the upper right of drought in 2021 shown by dark red, affecting a lot of the Western US. And sort of what some of the conclusions of this paper were looking forward, governance mechanisms have emerged that consider food security, sociocultural factors, and land and water rights using participatory, inclusive, two-way learning methods that involve vulnerable people alongside government. So I mention that because the technical fix is not sufficient for a lot of these water issues. And what we're trying to do in the project I'll describe is work with communities, learn some of the things we talked about, and actually have appropriate tools. Please.
To give you some scale for California, I think irrigated acreage is statewide is between 7 and 8 million. And there are projections that because of groundwater overdraft, at some point, say over the next 30 years, 1 million acres of land in the Central Valley would need to be fallowed. It would be affected by groundwater overdraft. You know, which in round terms is twice the acreage affected in 2015.
Wow, and that was a significant economic impact. So for those online, that was a really interesting comment that without trying to characterize it as carefully as you said it, that up to 1 million acres, twice this amount from drought, could be fallowed in the long run because of reduced irrigation associated with, I guess, climate change and drought.
It's raw overdraft.
Oh, okay. These are important issues. This is kind of coming back to the present. We're looking at a very dry year this year for Arizona and New Mexico. The red numbers in red, that's the snow water equivalent. Do you know what that is? Do you guys know what snow water equivalent is? Have you heard of it before? You know what it is? Okay. So if you take a tube of snow and you push it into your snowpack and say it's 10 feet deep, typically you only have 1/10 of that, or 12%, is water. So you melt your tube of snow and you get a foot of water. And that's basically the amount of water in your snowpack. So snow water equivalent is very important because you can compare it directly to precipitation by rain, and it tells you how much water you're getting. And in the Western US, like I described, where there's snow that melts in the mountains and goes and is used for irrigation downstream, this is what we're getting this year. I mean, we're talking about, like, you know, 20% of this is of the median for this period for almost 40 years. So, or I guess it's only 39 years. Anyway, for 29 years. But they take a median, and what's happened is, the other thing that's happening, even if you had 100% of your snow water equivalent in the mountains, we're getting less runoff because of the increase in temperature. So you might only get 70 to 80% runoff. And so really what we want to see is we want to see these numbers be like 110 or 120 to get our normal stream flow. So we're going to have a dry year coming up. Okay, any questions or comments on the state of water?
Does the variation correspond or line up with sort of above normal precipitation below? In other words, I can understand with more heat, more dryness, you get less water in the snowpack. It's the red area. How do you get more water in the snowpack?
It's basically the first thing you said. It's more precip because this was measured in February. Part of the reason I used the early one is the later ones are being affected by late season precip and by melting already. So at this point in the season, it was, like you said, associated with precip. But lately, because of that early warming, it's starting to be disassociated because of melting. Like in New Mexico, we're starting to get early February snow melt. So what happened, just for an example, which may not be easy to explain, but they measure how much water comes into Elephant Butte Reservoir, and they track it just according to the mean, like over time. And it was just tracking right with the mean through late February. How could that be? There's such low snowpack. Well, all that snowpack is melting early. So now they're really concerned that for late in the season, it's just going to take a nosedive because there's no snowpack to support that continued runoff. All right, well, let's see how we do on time, because this part I can kind of adapt, and I know you wanted time for discussion. This is talking about the future, so it's a little bit less, it's a little bit more arm wavy. So what do you think? How much time should I leave for?
15 minutes to get to the outline.
So maybe take another 5?
Sure. But I would go, speak as you like.
Okay.
Nominally, we have an hour and 15.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to talk about our Resilient Agriculture Water Community System project, some amazing collaborators, NMWRI, New Mexico State, USDA, Arizona State, where we are now, NASA. We have University of Nevada at Reno, University of Idaho, University of Wyoming. So big shout out to all of them. And this is just a picture of Valdez in the Rio Hondo watershed. And let's see, I think so this is I'll just use this diagram. So this project is set up to include the 3 typical land grant missions of research, education, and extension. And we have additional objectives of community engagement and our Western Water Network. So we're basically building on community engagement at sites around the Western United States. And it's pretty neat. We have the Rio Grande kind of upstream sites and lowland sites. We have the Snake River, kind of up high elevation sites in Wyoming and some lower elevation Snake River Plain sites in Idaho. And in Truckee Carson River, going from Lake Tahoe all the way to Pyramid Lake and looking at that system, including Fallon and some irrigation. So the idea is these are representative of the Western US, and all the little dots on this map are communities that we've been working with, just like the one I described for the Acequia community. These are projects that all these universities are working with around the West. And we're trying to learn from the communities what they need and deliver tools that they can use for better water management. And the approach is this system approach. There's not going to be a magic bullet. We need some integrated system tools that include economics and include even social factors like moral economy that look at surface water and groundwater connections, and of course, just water efficiency and agricultural water use. So that's the Agriculture Water Community System in the RAWCS title of the project. And here's some personnel, Dr. Lal on here, along with some other amazing collaborators. And just kind of taking a shortcut to some of the things we're really trying to get out of this project. Improved agricultural resilience in the face of water challenges from climate change. Can we take some of what we've learned from these small communities, from the scientific literature and all our research, and actually have some shareable, usable improvements in water management. Resilience of connected surface water and groundwater, understanding that these are intricately connected in ways that go beyond just conjunctive management for supplying the water user, but for maintaining healthy hydrology. And resilience of communities that rely on agriculture and water, resulting in resilient agriculture water community systems. So this is the basic outcomes we hope for. More specifically, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we have some great, so this project is a 5-year project, and we have collaborators at those community sites I mentioned doing on the ground crop trials on irrigation technology, surface groundwater modeling, the kind of traditional tools of research for water and agriculture. And we're putting them together into some of these regional water budget and accounting tools that are going to be usable by the community. So here's just an example of some community stakeholders, acequias, farmers, ranchers, the Soil and Water Conservation and Watershed Coalition. In this case, speaking of Rio Hondo, for an example, we have a ski valley and a ski village. There's Taos Pueblo, the indigenous group, the Forest Service, BLM, USGS, the federal agencies. These all have actors and stakes. These would be the stakeholders in this community. And here's the geographic perspective. It shows the watershed. So this was one of those little orange dots when I had the picture of the whole West. We have in color are the acequias, these irrigation ditches. We're measuring them. We learned from a grad student who did adaptive management with the community that they wanted access to the data. So we made an app that they can look at their phone, and that's what these little maps are, or the little graphs that are connected to the map. They can go on their phone and see what the flow data are. And that's actually helped them manage this water sharing agreement so that they have less conflict and more trust and better water management. But now we want to go beyond that. There's a little inset above which shows the whole watershed. This is just the lower part with agriculture. The upper part has forest and the ski area. And we want to give them a computer available water budget tool that they can move some levers and see how changing their future land use will affect their water. So we have some great collaboration from NASA. There's a model called NLDAS3 that they're going to help with some 1 kilometer downscaled gridded data that we can use for water budgets, not just at our site, but across the West. So we're going to deliver these tools from our experimental locations so that they can be used anywhere. That's the aspiration, using some of the remote sensing tools that NASA is providing. And the basic idea, this is, I think the last couple are just going to be about the network. So this looks a little bit busy, but we're trying to have a tool that the community members can see their water budget in an easy to manage way. So for example, more crops, more forests, that's more ET. Residential area may actually reduce ET. And then vice versa, because of this relationship, you could reduce crops and reduce forest, reduce ET. There's an opportunity to thin the forest and get less ET, and then you have more water that goes into stream flow. Deep percolation we talked about, right? Well, if they want to maintain that, they need to maintain their irrigation system, or they're not going to get recharge of their groundwater like they've had. Similarly, and then of course that goes into base flow that feeds stream flow. And if they want, well, with more residential area, there's actually more impermeable area and runoff, and with less forest, they'll get more stream flow. So we're hoping to actually create from a simple water budget. And Manu, anybody, I'd really love your ideas on how to make this as easy as a handheld device for stream flow and acequia flow. But there's a watershed group that's meeting in this location, and they have some very basic questions like this that we can provide some hydrologic data and help them with their management goals. So that's kind of like the end of where we're going with some of the tools for this project. And I'm gonna just follow up with the last points here, and we're gonna end in plenty of time with time. So the Western Water Network, we have obtained westernwaternetwork.org and .net and .com. So this is a site, it's weird, that's available. I don't know where that, oh, I must have drawn on the screen or something. Or maybe someone else did. But anyway, we are connecting communities. And the idea here is to connect all kinds of different communities with the Western Water Network. Our original logo, thanks to the Western Water Network members who started this out of Ag Experiment Station Network and the land-grant universities. And I haven't had time to go into that whole history. But the idea is connecting networks of networks. Things like our RAWCS project, things like the USDA Climate Hub's Water Adaptation Techniques Atlas, Ag Innovation West, that's the Ag Experiment Stations of the land grants, Extension. You had mentioned a multi-state with Ag Econ, or with Econ, right? So we're starting a new multi-state for this Western Water Net. And NMSU is going to be the hub for 5 years while we have this project, and then we'll see, maybe it'll move to somewhere else when they get a funded project. But the network serves the whole Western US, including Alaska and Hawaii, which you can't see here. And it's to share, I'm going to go back a slide, to share successes, challenges, tools, and techniques for improved water management that come from the communities who are on the ground managing water. With these complex intersecting issues. So we just started here with the institutions and the NIWAR groups that I'm direct representative and NMSU and at the NMWRI. Also some community sites that I already mentioned for this project and some major rivers. You might note that that your river is listed as a major river, even though it doesn't look like it when you drive by over here. And that's it. We're gonna be looking for ideas. It'd be really nice to hear what people think about networks that should be added to the Western Water Network. And this is kind of original groups with Western Water Network and then our RAWCS project launch. So thanks to all those great people and thanks to the audience today.